Overland Park, Kansas, a tapestry of quiet streets and manicured lawns, a place where life unfolded at a gentle pace. On Maple Street, nestled among these suburban dreams, stood an unassuming ranch house. 4 bedrooms, a welcoming porch, a place that whispered promises of normalcy. This was the home of the Smith family, Laura, her husband, and their children.
I always believed in the sanctity of home. My days were filled with the comforting rhythms of family life. School runs, grocery shopping, the laughter of children echoing through the halls. Life on Maple Street was predictable, comforting, safe.
The first sign was subtle, easily dismissed as the house settling. A soft creak on the stairs, a doorknob rattling gently in the night. Laura attributed these occurrences to the house's age.
But the whispers persisted, growing bolder each day. Footsteps echoed through the hallway long after the children were asleep. A cold spot settled in the living room, a persistent chill.
The children whispered of shadows moving in the night. They spoke of voices, faint and ethereal, carried on the breeze.
One evening, as twilight painted the sky, I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek. It was fleeting, but the sensation was undeniable. Fear pierced through my composure.
Days turned into weeks, each one bringing a new anomaly. Objects moved inexplicably. Lights flickered. The atmosphere grew thick with tension, a sense of being watched.
I researched the history of our home, hoping for a rational explanation. One night, Laura saw her first apparition. A woman in a white gown glided past the bedroom door. Then, the apparition vanished. The veil had thinned, revealing the house's true nature.
Life, for a time, continued in its familiar rhythm. Laura, clinging to normalcy, dismissed the strange occurrences as quirks of an old house. The creaking floorboards, she reasoned, were simply settling after years of standing. The rattling doorknob, a loose mechanism in need of repair.
I threw myself into the routines of daily life, focusing on my children, on maintaining a sense of order within our home. I kept the lights bright, the curtains drawn against the encroaching darkness. But even in the daylight hours, a sense of unease lingered, a prickling awareness that we were not alone.
Her husband, a practical man, remained skeptical. He attributed the strange sounds and fleeting shadows to Laura's overactive imagination.
It's an old house, honey. They all have their creaks and groans, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The air itself seemed different, charged with an unseen energy. It was as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for the moment to exhale.
They spoke of seeing fleeting figures in the periphery of their vision, of hearing their names whispered in the dead of night. Section 2, Shadows and Whispers. The children, however, were less easily convinced. Their young minds, unburdened by logic and reason, were more attuned to the subtle shifts in the atmosphere.
"Mommy," she'd ask, her voice barely a whisper, "why does that man stand at the end of the hall?"
Emily, their eldest, a sensitive soul with wide, questioning eyes, was the first to voice her concerns.
"It's just your imagination, sweetheart," she'd say, forcing a smile. "There's no one there."
But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. She too had noticed the shadows lengthening in the corners of her vision, the fleeting glimpses of movement that vanished when she turned her head. Section 3, A Child's Sight. One evening as Laura tucked Emily into bed, her daughter's small hand clutched at her arm.
"Mommy," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and fear. "The lady in the white dress is back. She's sad."
Laura's breath caught in her throat. She had tried so hard to convince herself that her own encounter with the spectral woman had been nothing more than a figment of her imagination. But to hear her daughter describe the same figure with the same chilling detail filled her with a bone-deep dread.
"What lady, sweetheart?" Laura asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. "What do you mean?"
"The lady in the white dress," Emily repeated, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond Laura's shoulder. "She's crying, Mommy. She wants us to know she's here." Section 4. The Intrusion of Cold. That night, as Laura lay awake, she felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. The air grew heavy as if a weight had settled upon the room. A chill, sharp and unnatural, seeped in, wrapping around her like an icy shroud. She pulled the blankets tighter, but the cold seemed to penetrate through the layers. Then she heard it, a soft sigh barely audible above the ticking clock. It seemed to originate from the foot of the bed. Terror surged through her. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart pounding.
The name came to me in a whisper, carried on the cold night air. Margaret, it breathed, the syllables heavy with sorrow and longing.
Days turned into sleepless nights as Laura grappled with the escalating strangeness that had invaded their home. Finally, after weeks of relentless searching, she found it. A brief obituary tucked away in the back pages of a decades-old newspaper. The obituary offered scant details, but it was enough to paint a picture of a life cut tragically short. Margaret, a beloved daughter and sister, had succumbed to a long illness, leaving behind a legacy of unfulfilled dreams.
As I delved deeper, I discovered she had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The image of Margaret, her face etched with pain and fear, haunted my waking hours.
She imagined Margaret spending her final days confined to a bedroom, watching the seasons change. Laura could almost feel the weight of Margaret's sorrow seeping from the walls. The more Laura learned about Margaret, the more she felt a sense of responsibility towards this spectral presence. It was as if Margaret, in her spectral form, was reaching out, seeking solace and perhaps even a silent witness to the life she had been denied. Laura began to sense that Margaret's presence was not one of malice, but of profound sadness, a deep yearning for the life she had been unable to fully embrace.
The children, their innocent hearts unburdened by fear, seemed to sense Margaret's sorrow as well. They would often leave small tokens of affection for her, a hand-drawn picture, a favorite toy in the room where she had spent her final days. As the weeks passed, Laura found a strange comfort in Margaret's presence.
The children, too, seemed to view Margaret as a benevolent presence, often referring to her as their special friend.
It was as if Margaret, in her spectral form, had become a silent guardian of the house.
Yet a nagging unease lingered in the back of Laura's mind.
Margaret's presence was a constant reminder of the unseen world. A darkness began to seep into the house on Maple Street, sending chills down Laura's spine.
Margaret's presence had a strange familiarity. She was sorrowful, trapped by her past, but not malevolent.
Shadows deepened, accompanied by fleeting glimpses of other figures.
The children reported whispers, voices laced with anger and despair.
Emily described seeing a man pacing the hallway, his expression twisted in a silent scream. The air grew heavy with an oppressive energy.
Laura felt Margaret's presence had drawn other lost souls to their doorstep.
The house had become a magnet for the restless dead.
Fear took root in her heart. The house on Maple Street now felt like a prison. One name emerged from the whispers: Victor. The children spoke of a man, his face etched with anger and despair, searching for something.
Driven to protect my family, I returned to the local archives. I spent hours poring over old newspapers, searching for any mention of a Victor connected to the Maple Street house. My search led me down a rabbit hole of tragedy and violence.
She discovered that in the 1950s, a man named Victor Blackwood had lived in the house. Victor, described as volatile and abusive, was suspected of foul play when his wife disappeared.
My blood ran cold as I read the details.
Victor allegedly murdered his wife in a fit of anger, burying her body on the property. Victor disappeared shortly after, leaving behind unanswered questions and darkness. Section 3, The Weight of Whispers.
The whispers took on a new urgency, the air thick with Victor's rage. Objects moved inexplicably, lights flickered, and the temperature plummeted.
Laura felt a growing sense of dread, realizing the house was a vessel for untamed emotions.
The children, once fascinated by Margaret, now clung to me in terror. Emily refused to sleep alone, claiming Victor stood in the shadows of her room.
Laura knew she couldn't ignore the escalating events. Victor's rage was palpable, his presence growing stronger. The house had become a battleground, and Laura feared for her family.
I had to find a way to appease the restless spirits.
Section 4, The House Remembers.
Fear whispered that the house itself was not innocent. The structure had absorbed the energy of the tragedies within its walls.
Laura noticed the shadows deepening in certain rooms. The air grew colder where Victor had committed his violent acts.
The house was a living entity, a witness to humanity's darkness. It held the memories of suffering and rage.
The house was a repository of pain, and Laura realized they were trapped in a nightmare. Section 1, Seeking Answers in the Darkness.
Desperate for answers, I reached out to paranormal investigators.
The investigators arrived, their van deepening the shadows on Maple Street.
Sarah, the lead investigator, set up her equipment with a calm demeanor. John, the tech expert, scanned the area, his fingers dancing over his gadgets. Emily, the psychic, listened to a conversation only she could hear.
The air crackled with anticipation as they set up their equipment.
As darkness fell, the investigation began. The investigators documented temperature fluctuations and unexplained noises. The house pulsed with electromagnetic energy like a heartbeat.
Emily moved through the house like a sleepwalker. She paused in the doorway of Emily's room, whispering of a lingering pain.
John announced a spike in EMF readings near the fireplace.
"Something's trying to communicate," he said.
The investigators gathered around a small wooden table.
"We mean you no harm," Sarah said.
The response was swift. The candle flame died, plunging the room into darkness. A cold wind swept through the house, slamming doors shut, and then a voice filled with anguish and rage echoed through the room.
"Get out!"
The days following the investigators' visit were a blur of activity and anxiety. The evidence they captured was undeniable.
I questioned my sanity, my grip on reality slipping.
The children retreated further into themselves, their laughter replaced by silence. Emily refused to be left alone, constantly searching for shadows.
The house had become a prison, a reminder of the darkness. The focus shifted from fear to understanding the spectral encounters.
The house on Maple Street had become a crucible.
I confronted my mortality and the mysteries beneath the surface. The house forced me to understand the coexistence of the living and the dead.
The investigators spoke of the house as a recorder. The walls, floors, and air absorbed the energy of intense emotional events.
I began to see the house in a new light. The creaking floorboards were echoes of Margaret's decline. The cold spot in the living room was Victor's rage.
The house felt fluid, its structure shaped by unseen forces. The boundaries between past and present blurred.
I imagined the layers of emotions embedded in the walls. The laughter, tears, and screams were imprinted on the house.
The house was a repository of memories, both beautiful and terrifying. Section 2, Residual Hauntings.
The investigators explained residual hauntings, events replaying like broken records.
The sounds of footsteps, flickering lights, and phantom scents were echoes of past events.
I clung to this theory, seeking order in the chaos.
These occurrences were artifacts of the past, reminders of lives lived.
The echoes clustered around certain dates, replaying key moments.
The anniversary of Margaret's death brought cold spots and the scent of lilies. The date of Victor's wife's disappearance brought an oppressive silence.
I kept a journal, documenting each event, searching for patterns.
She pieced together fragments of a puzzle, leading to a deeper mystery. Laura uncovered a tapestry of tragedy woven through generations. The house had witnessed heartbreak and loss.
A young couple lost their only child in a tragic accident. Their grief seeped into the walls, leaving an echo of sorrow.
A previous owner, driven to despair, took his own life in the basement. Each story added to the weight pressing down on Laura.
The house was a participant, shaped by the energy it absorbed. The floorboards creaked with unspoken grief. The air crackled with past conflicts.
The house was a living entity, intertwined with the lives and deaths of its inhabitants. Laura realized some houses are never truly empty, forever haunted by echoes of the past. Life on Maple Street never returned to the normalcy Laura had once cherished. The laughter of her children, once a constant melody, now came in hesitant bursts, punctuated by long moments of watchful silence. They had learned to navigate their world with a cautious awareness.
She no longer sought to banish the spirits. Instead, she tried to understand them.
Laura had embraced the unsettling reality of her haunted home. She had learned to coexist with the whispers, the cold spots, the fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures. There were moments when the fear returned, sharp and insistent, threatening to overwhelm her fragile peace. Nights when the air grew thick with unseen energy, when the temperature plummeted without reason.
But there were also moments of unexpected grace, hinting at a deeper purpose behind the hauntings. Times when I felt a comforting presence beside me as I read to my children. Or the scent of lavender, Margaret's favorite flower, wafting through the house.
The house on Maple Street remained a haunted place, but it was no longer defined by fear. It was a place where the past and present coexisted in an uneasy but illuminating embrace.
I was forever changed, carrying the weight of the house's secrets within me. The most terrifying hauntings whispered in the silence of our hearts, the unresolved grief, the unspoken truths.
The house on Maple Street taught her that some stories never truly end, they simply echo through time.